you been to the Library of Congress? If not, Thursdays are the perfect time to visit. Join them after hours for Live at the Library, where cocktails in the iconic Thomas Jefferson Building meets live music, author talks, crafting, exhibits, and more. Every week is different, free, and inspired by the library's collections. Don't miss their summer movies on the lawn, screenings of pop classics from the National Film Registry, starting July 9th with Clueless. Plan your next night out. Visit loc.gov/live. Today on CityCast DC, we're going to talk about the 4th of July weekend in retrospect. We're going to talk about the latest on the reflecting pool. We're going to talk about the fate of the old Capitol Skyline Hotel, which is actually one of the most interesting developments in DC. And we're going to talk about teen gun violence in DC. I'm here with my CityCast colleague, Emma Uber, and CityCast contributor, Marc Fisher. It's Tuesday, July 7th. I'm Michael Schaefer. Here's what DC's talking about. Hey, Mark.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Hey, Emma.
Hey, Mike.
So you guys World Cup fans?
Not
I am.
entirely. No, I'm kind of notorious for my disdain for soccer.
What is with the disdain?
Well, America is sort of a net exporter of sports, whether it's basketball, baseball, football. You rarely import sports, and when we do, we're kind of suspicious of them. And I think we've undergone now a half century of propaganda efforts to imbue younger generations of Americans with a love for soccer, joining the rest of the world. And kids love to run around. It's a great youth sport. But after that, they lose interest, and it just hasn't caught on.
I don't know. I feel like we're doing our best to. I feel like there's a global conspiracy to help us win, with the idea that then we will come. We're like the big whale pulling into the casino. Emma, why are you a soccer fan?
Well, I grew up really loving the U.S. women's national team. I played volleyball, but all my younger sisters played soccer. And so, the U.S. women's national team has been so dominant for so long, especially like in my childhood. So that was always so fun to watch Abby Wambach and Megan Rapinoe and Julie Ertz. And I feel like this World Cup, the men are catching up a little bit. I always root for the U.S., just out of principle. But normally I'm like really locked in the women's World Cup years and like a casual enjoyer of the group stage during the men's World Cup years, and then kind of tune out after because we rarely make it out. And so this year it's been exciting to see the men get a little bit of the hype that the women's team has enjoyed for years.
So I feel like I'm a soccer ignoramus, but I sort of like geopolitics. So I just sort of like the contest of figuring out which country I like better, and whether there's like a rational reason or just I like their uniforms or something.
Yeah.
The charming thing has been to see all of these stories and all these viral videos of foreign visitors discovering America anew and falling in love with bigness and falling in love with our excesses of all kinds. I think some of those videos are not quite what they appear to be, but nonetheless, it does some genuine charm that people are discovering about America when they arrive here expecting it to be a Trump-sodden wasteland.
And I think sports are one of the few ways that people still express like kind of unabashed patriotism, for better or for worse. I think for worse, like patriotism has become extremely politicized, especially in DC, to the point that like wearing your nation's flag in the nation's capital can like be seen as a political indicator. And that totally makes sense with like the vibe that America 250 has been. And so I always really enjoy like the World Cup, the Olympics, and things like that, because it does feel like sports are one of the last arenas of society where it seems a little less politicized. Though with recent presidential intervention in World Cup red card giving, that may be tainted now too. We'll see.
All right. So speaking of unabashedly American things, I want to just do a quick like postmortem, so to speak, on the July 4th weekend. Emma, you did this very sweet story about how these high school marching bands from Minnesota and Utah and Nebraska, having come to DC to march in the big national 4th of July parade, which was then canceled, wound up in the little neighborhood parade on 8th Street Southeast in Barracks Row. And I don't know, this sort of, in a day of a lot of like ill will between local Washington and like the national stage, this was a very sweet story.
Yeah, it was honestly a pleasure to write about and report. And I just was looking for a more local angle. And I noted the tension that has existed in my reporting too, because there has been this very clear tension that I think always exists in DC, but has never been more evident than in the past month or so between the people who live in this city and what some outsiders want this city to symbolize. And I think that with the Great American State Fair or even the Patriot Front, like there was so much of that tension on July 4th. And it's important to cover that and like examine what that means for our nation. But I also thought that there was this really sweet story of the Capitol Hill neighborhood coming together and literally in the 11th hour, like up to like an hour or two before the parade, inviting all these people into their like little neighborhood 3 or 4 block celebration and giving people from around the country a place to celebrate Independence Day in the nation's capital, but in a far more local way than maybe they anticipated. And there was this one scene that council member Charles Allen described to me at the end of the parade, kind of like in the Metro Plaza outside the Eastern Market Metro Station, where these high schoolers in marching band from Middle America heard this DC native go-go band playing and they engaged in this jam session. And Charles Allen was like, it was one of the most joyful things that I saw in a while. And he said perhaps made like more impactful because not an hour before there had been white supremacists standing in that same spot. And he was like, that's not the neighborhood I know. Like these outsiders came in and tried to make this statement. But he was like, not an hour later, there was this like show of joy and unity that he found really moving.
It's joy and it's unity, but it was a rare opportunity for a little bit of triumphalism on the part of DC residents, because the 4th of July parade is classically a really lousy parade, big one downtown. It's not, it feels corporate, it feels disconnected from the community, but at the same moment, there are these little community 4th of July parades that are happening in the Palisades, in Tacoma, in Alexandria, when you went to on the Hill, and that's the real DC. And here we was the real DC coming to the rescue. And for once, in these last couple of years, where the federal presence and the Trump domination has been so powerful and so dispiriting, well, once we had the neighborhoods fighting back in wood.
Right. And I think we in DC, insecure about being seen as just a government town and insecure about being, we're in a political bubble and we're out of touch with the real America. We fetishize sort of hokey, like Americana as much as anyone else does. At the Palisades parade, which I went to, it's weird. There's no marching bands because there's no marching bands. Like there's just not a lot of people doing marching bands around there in July. But like the thrill that was pretty evident in the Barracks Row folks of having like imported and linked arms with like quote unquote real America, as you say, Mark, it felt like a win and a moment when like we show that we're just as able to engage in like weenie roasts and apple pie as the next city. The flip side of that, I'm sorry to like steer to like the darkness of the 4th of July, is that viral photo from the Reuters photographer Cheney Orr taken in the Metro, I guess right after those Patriot Front members left 8th Street, which, for those of you who haven't seen it, shows a solitary black woman on the DC Metro not wearing a mask, surrounded by these masked, sort of khaki uniformed right-wing extremists. And it has, for a bunch of obvious reasons, gone viral. But I think of it, and I don't know who she is. I think there's a lot of people trying to find out who she is. There's a lot of like very ugly stuff online making allegations about who she is, or the picture is fake or something like that. But for people who live here, this is something you can relate to, right? You're just trying to go about your business. You're going wherever you're going on the Metro. And all of a sudden, the stagecraft of American political life surrounds you in a way that I imagine must have felt like incredibly gross and threatening and awful. And yet there you are, man, you're just waiting for your stop, you know?
Right. The photo is so striking, and I think that one of the most striking parts of it is, of course, the fact that she is the only person in the crowd that is uncovered. In a group of white nationalist men, she is a woman of color, and she's the only one brave enough to show her face. And I think that it's resonated with a lot of people. I also think that I I hope that she either gets to choose or not choose to reveal herself on her own terms, because that's an extremely symbolic photo. But to your point, that's just a regular, everyday woman going about her business. I actually have texted a little bit with the photographer, Cheney Orr, who has done such an amazing job with the photos. And he said that, yeah, they have not been able to identify her yet or get in contact with her, but I know they are trying to do so.
There's one sort of irony, which is the reversal of the symbolic meaning of the mask,
Yes.
which throughout COVID was the enemy of the right. The idea of masking it somehow un-American, and now we have the right wingers, the extremists wearing the mask, in I guess a more traditional American sense, going back to Diane and early mask wearers in the 19th century, and it's the presumed liberal DC resident who goes maskless. So it's just mask politics are always weird.
Before we pivot, any other July 4th reactions that the lines, the fences, the quality of the fireworks themselves?
I mean, the fireworks were classic Trump. It was excess, it was bombastic, it was spectacular in a very sensational sort of way. And yet there was something missing. There was some couple of people I was with noted that there were none of those cutesy things that we've seen in the previous July 4th fireworks displays. The smiley faces, the letters spelled out, the little symbols of Washington monuments and others iconic scenes. Instead, it was just blasting. And blasting beautifully, but and an overwhelming sense of power, even miles away, that house was shaking. So that's just Trump for you, creating a spectacle with hardly any regard for the actual content, hardly any attempt to win people over, charm them, anything like that.
Or even to show to them, in the sense that it was for reasons having to do with security. And this is not, just to be clear, this is not all a Trump innovation. The 4th of July has become more and more and more secure going back 20, 25 years. But these incredibly long lines that wouldn't have had to be so long if the president hadn't wanted to personally be there on the stage, and the large parts of the area that were closed off to viewers, it was sort of like a spectacle for a smaller group, plus TV. Where did you all watch from?
I was going to go to the National Mall, but I was one of the people that was deterred by the evacuation. I was on my way over, and then the evacuation was called, and I did not have faith that it was going to eventually happen. And I know lots of people actually didn't get in, like there were still lines outside. So I was just at my apartment, like kind of lame, kind of lame.
We headed down to the Georgetown waterfront,
Mm.
and which, because a lot of the fireworks were being shot off from barges in the Potomac, so the shooting site was more riverside than usual. And it was a big crowd, but not as big as usual. And traffic around town was lighter than usual. So this was really, as you say, this was a July 4th that was meant more for Trump and Trump's TV viewers than for the people who normally attend those functions in D.C. And the fencing, we've now had several weeks in a row of extreme fencing. We had the entirety of DuPont Circle fenced off for the Pride Festival. That had not happened. We had much of the mall fenced off for the events this weekend. That had not happened to nearly that extent before. This is, I think, a Trumpism. This is He's staging a show for television consumption, for his audience, his devotees, and the rest of the people who ostensibly being staged for in all previous years, they can sit home and watch it.
Yeah, I got to say, and I'll move just a couple blocks down the mall in a sec, but I was going downtown and I drove to the Tenleytown Metro and literally parked right outside the exit, which was not a thing that you could typically do on the 4th of July in the past. That said, there were enormous lines, so someone was going. But I think probably in the aggregate, not as many someones as usual, and a sort of a more dedicated someone. That is to say, people whose either desire for the anniversary or affection for the president or whatever made them more willing to put up with a degree of hassle that you won't put up with if you're from DC and you think, well, this happens every year.
Yeah, it definitely seems like more of a tourist event. The other thing that I was watching for was a public safety standpoint. And from that standpoint, it went off fairly smoothly. I mean, there were definitely issues with heat, but the DC Homeland Security joint force was sending out updates throughout the night, and there were remarkably few arrests. I think there were 4 arrests in total between midnight on July 3rd and 9 a.m. on July 5th on the mall, which I thought perhaps there would be more when I saw videos of people maybe refusing to leave. There were times where just as a public safety reporter, I was like, is this going to get tense? And it seemed like it was pretty safe from that standpoint. The heat was the biggest issue. There were, 96 people that DC Fire treated and 40 of them were taken to the hospital. So that's not a negligible number, but just as a public safety reporter, anytime that there's a big crowd, and especially in this current political climate, anytime the president's speaking, I'm kind of always on edge about what's going to happen. And from that standpoint, I am very thankful that even with the weather, even with the heat, even with the evacuation, even with security having to be taken down and brought back, there was no major events of violence or major events of arrests or things like that.
And there was some of the darkness there. Trump himself claims that some safety ninnies wanted to cancel the whole thing, but he overruled them. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what he has claimed. And if that had happened, I was already seeing some of the discourse about the deep state, through its safety personnel is trying to stop this.
The French have a phrase, joie de vivre, the joy of living. At Alliance Française in Washington, D.C., that spirit is right here in your city. Language classes, cultural events, a community that makes French feel like home. And this summer, kids can dive into French immersion camps with weekly themes and field trips. And when you become a member, you save on all of it. Classes, camps, and events all year long. So discover your joie de vivre at FRANCEDC.org. That's francedc.org. I have a bit of good news to share from our sponsors at the DC Department of Behavioral Health. And that is that DC is turning a corner, and the numbers back it up. Fatal opioid overdose dropped 33% in this city from 2023 to 2024. Now, that is not just data. That's real people and real families that are still together. But listen, the work isn't done, and neither are we. If you or someone that you love is struggling, help is closer than you think. Text Live Long DC to 888-811 to connect with treatment, housing, and recovery support right here in the district. Free Narcan is available at nearly 40 locations across DC because nobody should lose someone for lack of access. And if you're in crisis right now, call or text 988. Know your worth, know your alternatives, know your value, know yourself. Recovery is possible. Find out how at knowyourpathdc.com.
Let's move a couple blocks away from the fireworks to the reflecting pool, because that's another, I think, going to be a story in this coming week in DC. Emma, you did reporting for us on Thursday about the arrest of this former Olympian who was accused of vandalizing the pool. I see that guy as maybe being like Sandwich Guy 2.0. Like I have a hard time imagining him being made a felon by a jury of his peers. And I don't mean fellow Olympians, but I mean fellow Washingtonians. But the thing that I thought was amazing was on Sunday, Doug Burgum, the Interior Secretary / point person for Reflecting Pool Affairs, was on one of the Sunday shows. And they asked him, it was a no-bid contract. A lot of stuff went wrong. Are you going to rebid it? And he said, no, they did a fantastic job. We're not going to rebid it, which is, to me, their way of doubling down on the insistence that only vandalism is the reason why the reflecting pool hasn't been perfect. And that, again, suggests to me that there's a great deal of pressure on prosecutors, whose case you've covered and are going to be covering, to sort of bring us the result that fits with the things we're going out and saying in public, which is a pretty dangerous situation. And when there's a jury involved, it's a situation that usually doesn't end up well for the pressurers.
Right. I mean, I've seen the comparison between David Hearn and Sandwich Guy made a bunch, but already there's a distinction in that the prosecutors tried to get a felony brought against Sandwich Guy, Sean Dunn, and the grand jury refused. And so they went after him for a misdemeanor, which you don't need a grand jury to indict for, and they failed on that too. The prosecutor's office has actually, surprisingly to me, already seen more success on this case. They convinced a grand jury to indict him on a felony charge that carries up to 10 years if convicted. Similarly, I thought kind of regardless of the evidence in Deep Blue DC, there'd be zero appetite for a grand jury to try to indict him. And so that's just kind of piqued my interest as to what evidence they presented to the grand jury in order to get that indictment, because it's not the outcome I expected. I expected it was going to follow a Sandwich Guy route. The other thing that I want to touch on about David Hearn, this 3-time Olympian, is he is lawyered up. It is crazy. His legal team, I mean, are two of the savviest lawyers in taking on the Trump administration. And so I think that this could really be like sparks in the courtroom, where it could be a case where prosecutors are heavily incentivized by Trump and Burgum and everyone to really make an example of this guy. But he doesn't have a random public defender representing him. No offense to random public defenders, but his attorneys have been on the front lines. Norm Eisen and Mary Dorman. Eisen was a diplomat and then ethics czar under Barack Obama, and then he was special counsel for the House Judiciary Committee, aka he really took the charge on Trump's first impeachment and has written a book about it. And then Dorman was part of U.S. Special Counsel Jack Smith's team that criminally prosecuted Trump. So these are lawyers who have been in the mix on some of the most high-profile Trump administration litigation.
Reflecting pool guy is in deep algae. This is a serious charge for a very unserious act. When what he's accused of is picking out and holding up a piece of already torn off, already flaked off paint from the bottom of the reflecting pool. So he was essentially removing garbage from the reflecting pool. That's the whole accusation. So this is a political prosecution. It's always difficult to report inside a grand jury, near impossible in most cases. But I would sure love to know what was going through the minds of those grand jurors and what amazing arguments were led against them by Jeanine Pirro's office that she was able to get this indictment. Administration, this is classic Trump use of the courts. He once told me that he files these lawsuits knowing he can never win. In this case, a prosecution, but rather his goal is to destroy the person on the wrong end of the lawsuit. And this guy would be a fairly easy person to destroy. We already see, presumably he's getting a heavily discounted rate from those lawyers, if not pro bono. But nonetheless, this is going to cost him a lot in terms of everything from reputation to money to anxiety. And that's Trump's goal, and Trump succeeds in that aspect of his legal game playing almost every time.
And I think, they can go in court and say, look, like if I'm walking down the street and I come across a building that is collapsing, and I grab a brick out of the collapsing wall, am I too vandalizing the building, even though the wall was collapsing anyway? I mean, they could get into these like sort of abstractions, which are, maybe by the standards of the law, that would make me guilty too. I don't know. But I wouldn't want to be in court. Even I would rather be sandwich guy in court than a reflecting pool guy. Although I think both of them have a pretty good chance.
Yeah, I mean, reflecting pool guy. What's his defense going to be? He was volunteering to help the citizens protect their property. That he was helping with the cleanup and leaving the Park Service of some work. I don't know.
Well, I think it's important to note that there seems to be a discrepancy between his account and what Pirro is saying. Like Pirro has refused to say publicly whether it was damaged or not. So in his account, he's said it was already damaged. I'm picking it up. Our colleagues at CityCast, Ben Brash, literally saw pieces of the paint floating in the pool and in the grass the day before this arrest occurred. So it stands to reason that it is completely possible he could be picking up a piece of already detached paint. At the press conference, Pirro did not answer that question. She was pressed rather insistently by members of the media, and she would not specify if the area of the pool in question had been damaged before her. She just said, he caused damage. He caused damage. I can tell you that he caused damage. Would not say if it was damaged before or not. And she described him as forcefully and violently removing it with two hands. And so I just am interested to see the facts of the case that they present in court, because the words that she was using, forceful, violent, disrespectful, and rude towards law enforcement, was like quite aggressive language, but the actual facts of what they are alleging he did are extremely obscure. Like, it feels like the most salient fact is whether it was already damaged, and still no one from the government has given a definitive yes or no answer on that.
Mark, you wrote a great column this week about the Capitol Skyline Hotel. And here's the big news for everybody. It ain't there anymore, which you discovered. And you're a person who's written a big story about it in the past, but you discovered this at random en route to a Nats game.
Exactly. Walking down Capitol Street, just a couple blocks north of Ballpark, there's a big empty lot where there had been this very, not terribly impressive, but very important building that had been there since 1962. Very mid-century modern. It was designed by Morris Lapidus, who's most famous for the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, but did some other buildings here in D.C., including a couple of residential apartment buildings in Southwest, and the hotel on Thomas Circle, which has had various names through the years. And so the Capitol Skyline Hotel was a place where people who had business in Congress would go in the 1960s. It had a cocktail bar. It had a restaurant. It had, as it advertised quite prominently, it had TV and air conditioning in every room. Very fancy stuff for 1962. In any event, over the years, it really tracked the history of the district in an impressive way. It was, the ups and downs were all there to see at the Skyline. And it was everything from the place where kids would go on their 8th grade trip to Washington, or locals would have their high school proms there. It had a pool, which was famously very popular among the young folks who moved to that neighborhood, to the Ballpark district in recent years. It was also a place where you could easily get robbed and killed back both in the aftermath of the riots in the 60s, and then again in the 80s, when it was a very sort of drug and murder capital of the world. It was in one of those places that symbolized that dark period of Washington history. And it's also a place where a lot of sort of weird dreams about Washington came to fruition or didn't. There's a family, the Rubels, who have opened an art museum across the street from the Skyline Hotel. Skyline was their first big purchase in Washington. They'd purchased a whole bunch of stuff in Miami before that. And they thought this was going to be the arts capital of the district. And so the Artomat annual show was staged there a couple of times. They tried to turn the pool into a really cool place with a DJ and orange couches and a limbo contest and that sort of thing. And yet during COVID, it was repurposed, taken over by the city, used as a homeless shelter. So it's just been through everything. And now it's gone.
What did it in?
I think the change in the neighborhood, basically nothing has survived in the area since the baseball stadium and the soccer stadium were built. There's pretty much nothing left from what was there before. In most cases, good riddance. It was empty lots and industrial stuff, and the yard where the taxis got their repairs and car washes. There were some power substations. There was a lot of gunk in that area, but there were also a few row houses, and there was standing there by itself the Skyline, a block away from the DC car inspection place. So what did it in is it was in the middle of nowhere for a long time. Nobody went there for any particular purpose. Then, as all these big box apartment buildings popped up all around it, it seemed old and sad, and there was no reason for anyone to stay there. It was in terrible shape physically. The Rebels attempt to sort of gentrify it through the arts, good old tried and tested method of improving a property, didn't really take. And so Rebels decided to move on. They put their money into building a big fancy building right across the street. And now they're going to put a couple of big fancy apartment buildings that are just like the ones all around it on the Skyline side.
So here's what I don't get. Like in DC, like people have made a whole fetish of the Wendy's in Dave Thomas Circle, right? It's closing. It's finally being gone. This became a meme. And yet this landmark of a sort building is like wrecking balled, and no one really talks about it. So there's a sort of there's something about the way kind of current Washington does memory that is unpredictable.
It's unpredictable in part because we don't have the news infrastructure that we used to have. There was a time when, if you think about the Christian Science Church on 16th Street, a block off from the White House, which was a very controversial building, brutalist, ugly, and yet loved by a few preservationists. There was a battle that went on for years about whether to tear that down. It finally did, but the battle went on because it took on a symbolic meaning that was fueled, and the debate was fueled by the press. The Post is not doing those kinds of stories anymore. We're doing it at CityCast. There are some other places that have started to try to pick up on some of those kinds of stories, but there isn't the same kind of momentum that the Post provided when it was in its biggest, best phase. In addition, I think it really takes a lot for a property to have that sort of symbolic importance that we see in a place like, say, the Uptown Theater in Cleveland Park or the Kennedy Center, which is now very much in danger. You would see a big to-do if Trump started making a move to tear down the Kennedy Center, which may well happen. But on the other hand, you have the various federal buildings that they're in the process of selling off. The Cone building where the Voice of America is headquartered has these WPA-era murals that are absolute gems. And there are preservationists who really care about this and want these to be saved. On the other hand, there's not a big public movement to save them. So it's a mixed bag. I don't think you can always predict which ones will get the public riled up. But the Skyline Hotel was never had a local following that was about to take to the streets to say
right. Right. Well, I loved your piece. Everyone should go read it. It's at dc.citycast.fm. Today, paid subscribers get a bonus fourth roundup chat. We're going to be talking about a shooting last week and what it means for how DC takes on youth violence. If you want to be sure you always get the full episode, please become a member. Head to membership.citycast.fm and sign up. It's only $10 a month. Members get ad-free listening, exclusive members events, and an extra events newsletter each and every week. Again, that's membership.citycast.fm. And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. I'm your host, Michael Schaefer. You can get more news delivered right to your inbox by subscribing to the CityCast DC newsletter. If you enjoyed today's show, why not share it with a friend? We'll see you back here tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.